I lived in Lund in Sweden from 1989 to 1992. I was there doing some doctoral studies in archaeology and history. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Swedish geography, Lund is very, very far down in the south of the country, almost next to Copenhagen. In fact, if you were to take an arc compass, I was nearer to Rome than I was to the Arctic Circle when you're down in the south of Sweden. And it's just a short ferry ride then, now there's a bridge, but a ferry ride over to Germany and Poland. And from those of you who remember the momentous events of 1991 and 92, it was a turning point in modern Western history. The fall of the Berlin Wall happened. And every night I would be sitting there watching these events unfold on television. And it was totally unbelievable to me what I was seeing. The Berlin Wall, for me, having grown up in the Cold War, was a fact of life, like gravity. It was just always going to be there. And suddenly you see people just walking through and knocking it down. So when a friend of mine said to me, "Why don't we take the train down to Berlin and see what's going on?" At first I couldn't believe that that would be possible. I'm an American, I can't go through East Germany. But he said, "Oh, sure you can. You can go through East Germany. We'll stay in West Berlin." So we went down on an overnight train and we rolled into the Hauptbahnhof by the Tiergarten, and we stayed at this little bed and breakfast on the Kurfürstendamm, which was really nice. But the first place we went was to the Brandenburg Gate to see the wall and what was left of it. And I have to tell you that I watched a lot of spy movies when I was a kid and read spy novels. So I was both terrified and disappointed when I went to Checkpoint Charlie, because the razor wire and the guard towers and the machine guns and the spotlights and the guards were all still there, but they just waved us through. And I could see people coming the other way and going back and forth, the East Germans with their arms full of groceries, and all of us heading the other way to see what communism looked like. So the next day we went back and we wandered around in East Berlin. And there's part of it, now it's downtown Berlin, but there's a part of it that's the imperial part, the old imperial capital, where the cathedral is and the palace is and museums. And as we were walking along, I said, "Hey, that place over there is called the Pergamon Museum. Let's go in there, let's check it out." And because it was still sort of communist, it only cost 50 cents, which is what I remembered first. But then, as we walked inside, and I had no idea what to expect, thinking it was just another museum, I was completely blown away. My entire history and Western civilization education, from elementary school through high school, was in this building. All the pictures from all the textbooks about Assyria and Egypt and Sumeria and Babylon and Rome and Greece were inside that building. In one room, they had an entire Greek temple, the altar from Pergamon. German archaeologists had just taken the whole thing from Greece and brought it back to Berlin, and there it was, just like in the pictures of my books. And in the next room, I walked around the corner, and the gates of Babylon are in the room. And the mosaics along the processional walkway that are there in these bright blue with lions, just like in the textbooks, are there. And in another room, the Tower of Ishtar. And in another room, Roman mosaics, just like in the textbooks. Room after room after room of ancient Babylon and Persia and Sumeria and Egypt and Greece and the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. And for me, it was like walking in a dream as I walked from room to room, because on the one hand, I knew exactly what I was looking at. And I knew its history because I'd been reading about it all my life. But in an odd way, it was as if I didn't really believe that it actually existed, because I'd only seen it in books. In a way, it was a little bit like heaven for me, where this idea became reality and I could see it. Now, we fast forward 30 years. Barry and Laura and I took the boys to London. And I really, really, really wanted to go see the British Museum because I knew what was in there. I'd been studying it all my life. I wanted to have another Berlin experience. I wanted to have our boys have a Berlin experience. I wanted them to see what I knew they were going to be studying in school. And I didn't tell them too much about what was inside because I wanted to surprise them. And so we walked into the British Museum, and they have this amazing modern architecture now. And you go upstairs and into the first room, and we walked right into a mob scene. It looked to me like a pile of ants that were climbing all over each other around this thing. I said, oh, that must be the Rosetta Stone. And the boys knew what that was. But as I looked more closely at all the people surrounding the Rosetta Stone, it appeared to me that no one was actually looking at the Rosetta Stone, let alone reading the information about the Rosetta Stone. What they were doing was taking pictures of the Rosetta Stone, shooting movies of the Rosetta Stone, seeing it through their iPhones, taking selfies like, look, Mom, me and the Rosetta Stone. And we eventually did get up through the crowd to see the Rosetta Stone, and I tried to explain, that this is the hieroglyphs, and this is the Greek, and that's how they figured out what hieroglyphs meant. But it was hard, because it was behind glass, and on the glass, all I could see was flashes going off and the reflections of people looking at it through their phones and sending movies and talking and doing FaceTime with people like, look, here's the Rosetta Stone. Now, I'm not complaining. That's the life we live. I'm getting to the point of this exercise. And I loved the British Museum, but I remember thinking it was and I'm not even going to get to the Louvre, which was a whole nother ball. I mean, Mona Lisa is like a whole other thing. But the experience of being in the British Museum was this strange experience of partly I was seeing it for myself, and partly I was watching people watch it through their phones. I remember we were in the Viking wing, which is like, wow, here we are. This is it. And there were people walking around like dictating the tour as they were moving from one axe to a skeleton to a Cornhoid, and they were telling what they were seeing, but it didn't seem like they were seeing it. They were saving the memory for later. If you were experiencing life through a filter of the phones. And that's the reality of our life today. You go to any sporting event, and I would bet at least 50% of the people are watching it through their phones. Or if you go to any tourist site, most people have their phones out. And while that's a reality of our world, it's also a great metaphor for the spiritual challenge of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. Because the lesson is about recognizing the risen Christ, seeing what's there, or seeing what we're taught to see, seeing what we think we ought to see, seeing what we're shown, seeing what everyone else is looking at. For example, you see another person, and like it or not, the first thing that happens is you begin to categorize that person that you see. Known person, unknown person. Friend, stranger, enemy. Gender, attractive, unattractive. Safe or dangerous, and so on. And our mind are making decisions about what we're seeing. But how about the filter that we learn in church? A child of God, the image of God, reflection of holiness. Now that's something we're seeing. Or we're going through life and we see things, and like it or not, our mind begins to categorize things. Is it good or is it bad? What's it for? Can I eat it? Or is it a tool? Do I want it or not? As opposed to seeing things and saying, the handiwork of God, the creation of God, the reflection of the divine. Now that's something we're seeing. Now I know what all of that might not really connect with you, but what I would bet that most of you struggle, like I do, with the struggle of too much life coming at you and across your desk. And what you find yourself living is what I call a materialist, utilitarian, consumer way of life, where your day, because you have so much to do, is about what you have to get done. And so your mind is constantly making choices about what's your best option. Can I do this? I have to do that. Can I squeeze this in? As you rush through your days, and you admit, I admit, I don't have the bandwidth or the ability to control the tempo to see Jesus, frankly, even if he was standing on the hood of my car as I'm rushing here and there, because I'm looking at my GPS to figure out what's the best way to get to where I'm going. So my friends, when we hear stories like this, we're reminded our faith is not to teach us how to be great people. Our faith is to remind us that we can see God, the risen Christ, outbursts of holiness everywhere, all the time, in all things. And to encourage ourselves, if it's been a while since that's happened, to try to find a way back to that road, that our eyes might be opened and we might see.